In 1912, a group of British scientists were shown a skull, part human, part ape, found in a gravel pit in Piltdown, England. They called it the missing link. The scientific establishment believed it, celebrated it for over 40 years. It was a forgery, a human skull and orangutan jaw, filed down and stained to look old. Nobody caught it for 4 decades, not because the tools to catch it didn't exist. Fluorine dating, the method that eventually exposed it, was available for most of that time. They caught it because someone finally asked the right question, using a specific learnable move, not critical thinking, something more precise than that. You've heard critical thinking your whole life. It's in every school mission statement, every corporate training, every self-help book about not getting fooled. And it's mostly useless advice. Not because it's wrong, because it's vague. Question things. Consider the evidence. Don't believe everything you read. Okay? How? With what tool? Applied to what specifically and in what order? Most critical thinking education stops at the level of disposition. Be skeptical. Stay open-minded. It almost never gets decomposed into specific, repeatable, teachable moves, the kind of thing you could actually hand someone and say, run this on the claim in front of you right now and tell me what you find. That decomposition, that's what we're going to build in this video. And there's a better name for it than critical thinking. It's called Applied Epistemology. Epistemology is the branch of philosophy that asks, how do we know what we know? What separates a justified true belief from a lucky guess or a convenient lie? For most of its history, that's been an abstract academic question. Philosophers arguing about the definition of knowledge in seminar rooms. Applied epistemology takes that question out of the seminar room and turns it into a working toolkit. Not what is knowledge in principle, but given this specific claim in front of me right now, is it true and how would I check? It has 2 components. And this distinction is the whole idea, so pay attention here because everything else in this video builds on it. A principle is a generative rule, something you learn once and it works on material you've never seen before. It doesn't require new facts to apply. It's a procedure. A pillar is different, and this took some real trial and error to define correctly, so let's be precise. A pillar is not just an interesting fact. It's not a memorable case study, and it's not trivia dressed up as importance. A pillar has to pass 3 tests. It has to be structural, not one example among many, but the concept the rest of the field's material actually refers back to. It has to be interwoven, meaning you can't correctly understand most other claims in the subject without it. If you removed it, would the subject still hang together? If yes, it wasn't a pillar. It was just a good example. And it has to be foundational, not derived. A base relationship the field is built from, not a conclusion the field's investigation eventually arrived at. Take religion, since that's the domain this whole idea started in. The Shema, the Lord our God is one Lord, isn't one interesting verse among thousands. It's the theological claim every other statement in the tradition gets checked against. The 10 Commandments aren't a memorable historical anecdote. They're the base moral and legal framework everything later in the text builds on top of. Remove either one, and the rest of the material stops making structural sense. That's a pillar. And here's the part that matters most about pillars. They're not permanent. They're provisional, resting on current evidence. And if you run a principle directly against one, it can fall. For nearly 1400 years, one of the most settled pillars in all of astronomy was this. The Earth sits at the center of the universe and everything else revolves around it. Not a fringe idea, the working foundation the entire field was built on. As observations piled up that didn't fit, planets that appeared to move backward in the sky, the phases of Venus, astronomers didn't throw the model out. They patched it, added more circles within circles called epicycles to force the data to still fit the old framework. That's framework import detection failing in real time. bending the evidence to protect the pillar instead of checking the pillar against the evidence. Copernicus, then Galileo, then Kepler asked the more basic question: which model actually predicts what we observe without needing constant patches? The simpler one did. Sun at the center. And a 1,400-year-old pillar came down, not because someone found one new fact sitting next to it, but because someone finally ran the check on it. That's the whole point. A pillar isn't dogma. It's just a claim that survived the check so far. Here's the metaphor, corrected. Principles are the beams. They carry weight across the whole structure, reusable everywhere, transferable between buildings entirely. Pillars are the columns. They don't transfer to a different building, but within this building, every floor rests on them, from the ground up. You need both. A building made only of beams has nothing to stand on. A building made only of columns with no beams connecting them isn't a structure at all, just isolated supports holding up nothing. That's the actual failure mode of most education, by the way. Either pure content memorization, pillars with no beams, a pile of facts nobody can apply to anything new, or pure critical thinking abstraction, beams with no foundation, a method that sounds good in a classroom and evaporates the moment it meets a real, specific, complicated claim. Let's make this concrete. Here are 5 principles, 5 reusable moves that do most of the work. Source stratification. Before you weigh what a claim says, rank where it came from. Primary source, secondary source. Someone's inherited assumption, repeated so many times it feels like fact. Tier determines how much weight a claim can bear before you've even read the content. Lectio difficilior, the harder reading principle. This one comes from a real academic discipline, textual criticism, the study of ancient manuscripts. When 2 versions of the same story disagree, the version that's more awkward, more inconvenient, more embarrassing to whoever's telling it, that version is more likely to be the original. People smooth stories toward convenience. They rarely make their own story harder to believe by accident. Framework import detection. Ask, is this conclusion actually stated by the evidence, or has someone imported an outside framework to make the evidence fit a conclusion they already wanted? Asymmetric silence. Don't just notice when something isn't mentioned. Notice when it should have been mentioned. When there was an obvious, natural moment for a clarification, a denial, a correction, and it didn't come. Cui bono. Who benefits? The oldest one. Ask who gains if this claim is believed. Not as proof it's false, as a flag that says, check this one more carefully than usual. 5 moves. That's most of the engine. Everything else is application. Let's go back to Piltdown Man, and then further because this pattern repeats constantly across history, and once you see it, you can't stop seeing it. Piltdown Man. Scientists in 1912 were primed to want a missing link between apes and humans. The framework, this fossil confirms our evolutionary timeline, got imported onto the evidence before the evidence was properly checked. Nobody applied stratified skepticism to the source of the find until decades later. The tobacco industry. For nearly 50 years, tobacco companies funded research that consistently found insufficient evidence linking smoking to cancer. The question that should have been asked immediately, who paid for this study, and what do they gain if the answer comes back this way, wasn't asked seriously enough for decades by regulators or the public. The same exact pattern happened with leaded gasoline, and with sugar industry funded research in the 1960s, quietly shifting blame for heart disease away from sugar and onto dietary fat. Different decades, different industries, same missing question. Bernie Madoff. A financial analyst named Harry Markopolos flagged Madoff's fraud almost a decade before it collapsed. His method? Madoff's investment returns were too smooth. In a real strategy trading real options, you'd expect volatility, ups and downs. The complete absence of that expected noise was itself the red flag. Silence where noise should have been. Regulators ignored him for nearly 10 years. Thousands of investors lost their savings. Lysenkoism. In the Soviet Union, genetic science was forced to fit a pre-decided ideological framework rather than the other way around. Dissenting geneticists were suppressed. Millions suffered from the resulting agricultural failures. The conclusion came first. The evidence was arranged to match it. None of these failures required a specialist to catch. Every single one could have been caught earlier by someone applying one of 5 simple, learnable questions, consistently and without deferring automatically to institutional authority. That's the actual stakes here. This isn't an academic exercise. So here's the natural next question. Could you actually teach this on purpose, from scratch? We built out what that curriculum would look like. And here's the first surprise. It starts almost nowhere near zero. Phase 1, baseline, 0 additional hours. A typical high school graduate already has reading fluency and numeracy through basic algebra. That's not a small thing. It's the majority of what a traditional foundation stage will cover. So this curriculum doesn't reteach it. It starts from where a normal graduate already stands. Phase 2, logic plus the method, roughly 300 hours. This is the real gap. Formal logic, validity versus soundness, necessary versus sufficient conditions, basic proof structure, common fallacies, is almost never taught explicitly in standard schooling. Most students graduate without it. That gets taught here, alongside the 5 principles, as their own subject, before any deep domain content, through short, cross-domain examples. So students see immediately that these tools aren't specific to one subject. The same move that catches a forged fossil also catches a forged ancient manuscript, also catches a Ponzi scheme. Phase 3, domain application, roughly 200 hours. Now you apply the method inside real fields, math, physics, biology, and medicine, history, religion, business. But, and this is the key design choice, you don't teach comprehensive coverage of each field. You teach 2 things only. The small generative core of each subject a capable student can extrapolate from, and a curated set of pillars, the structural concepts everything else in that subject is checked against. In religion, the Shema, the 10 Commandments, the Golden Rule. In biology, cell theory, evolution by natural selection, homeostasis. In economics, scarcity and opportunity cost, supply and demand, incentives. Not memorable trivia, the load-bearing skeleton each field is built on top of. One more thing worth saying here. A pillar is delivered, not re-derived. You don't need to become fluent in Koine Greek to understand why a single grammatical distinction settled a centuries-old theological argument. You need the specific distinction and enough context to see why it's decisive. That takes minutes, not years. That's what makes the pillar concept efficient. Someone already did the hard original work. The pillar is what's left standing after that work is done. Phase 4, capstone. Roughly 175 hours, 1 independent project. The student picks a genuinely contested question, something real people actually disagree about, and works it end to end, using the method, citing the pillars, holding every step to the same evidentiary standard. Total, starting from a normal high school graduate, roughly 675 hours. That's about 17 full-time work weeks. Not quite 1 summer, closer to 2 summers back to back, or 1 relaxed pass spread across a full school year at around 20 hours a week. That's the entire cost of building someone capable of independently adjudicating contested claims across science, history, religion, and business. Not as an expert in any one of them, but as someone who can't easily be fooled in any of them. So let's close the loop. What's the actual difference between this and critical thinking, the thing you already thought you were being taught? Critical thinking tells you to be careful. Applied epistemology gives you the specific wrench, tells you which bolt it fits, and shows you the 4 times in history that exact bolt came loose and something collapsed because nobody checked it. That's the difference between a value and a discipline. Somewhere, right now, there's a modern version of the Piltdown skull, a claim that's being believed not because it's true, but because it's convenient, or because the right people said it, or because nobody asked who benefits. You don't need a PhD to catch it. You need 5 questions, applied consistently to everything. That's applied epistemology.